Guys like you don't belong in venture real estate anymore. You still use Excel. We use AI. That sentence didn't just end my career, it erased 3 decades of blood, sweat, and sanity in the span of 9 words. I was sitting at the end of a polished walnut table in a glass-walled conference room on the 22nd floor of AltusUrban Capital, a firm I had co-founded with nothing but a borrowed office, a Rolodex, and a belief that complex real estate could be rescued and repurposed. The young man across from me, Nathan Zhao, our newly appointed CEO, said it without even lifting his eyes from his laptop. He was dressed like a TED Talk speaker, no-tie black shirt, trendy glasses, and he had just come back from a 2-week retreat in Tulum about conscious scaling. Meanwhile, I had been in the field evaluating a neglected industrial site in Cincinnati, trying to untangle decades of environmental abuse. But none of that mattered. Not my experience. Not my loyalty. Not even the $1. $8 billion in equity we had placed successfully over 27 years. To them, I was a dinosaur. And like all dinosaurs, I was expected to go extinct, quietly, quickly, and without causing a scene. They forgot what I built because they never bothered to understand it. AltusUrban Capital wasn't always a sleek glass tower with assistants holding iPads and venture partners quoting McKinsey. In 1995, it was a folding table inside a converted dry cleaning shop in Cleveland. I was 32, newly laid off from a commercial lending group and broke enough to take a chance on an idea nobody believed in redeveloping urban land that institutional money avoided like the plague. Brownfields, empty factories, decaying motels assets, labeled unrecoverable by every major bank. I believed they weren't broken, just misread. And so I teamed up with a former city planner and a retired construction exec, and AltusUrban was born. I handled the analysis. While others saw liability, I saw inefficiencies that could be untangled. I built our first underwriting model on a battered laptop code, risk-weighting projected returns all manually. No APIs, no cloud tools. Just hard-earned instinct turned into logic. That system evolved over time, year by year, deal by deal. I layered in automation tax lien predictors, brownfield remediation thresholds, multi-jurisdictional permitting variables. It wasn't beautiful, but it worked. Deals closed, investors earned, and cities started to change. What we did was dirty legal and transformational. By 2007, AltusUrban had closed 83 redevelopment deals and managed over $600 million in assets. While our competitors chased luxury condos in New York and tech parks in Palo Alto, we turned condemned hospitals into mixed-use housing. I was the one who told the engineers what questions the city would ask. I trained analysts on how to spot legal tricks buried in parcel histories. I showed our acquisition team how to read a building's future in its cracks and copper piping. We never made Forbes, but we made neighborhoods livable again. Then the 2008 crash came, and I kept us alive. When mezzanine debt froze and LPs panicked, I renegotiated loan terms with community banks one by one. I built a risk firewall that segmented our portfolio into red, yellow, and green zones. I personally worked through 14 weekends straight to redesign our exposure tracking in Excel when a $70 million multifamily rehab almost tanked us. Nobody asked for it. I just did it. After that, I codified everything into what I called the Real Asset Grid, a proprietary framework that factored in 54 variables: environmental, legal, social, logistical. It wasn't flashy, but it became the foundation for over $1.8 billion in capital placement over the next decade. That framework caught issues no algorithm could. A 2014 hotel deal in Detroit had a secret deed restriction buried in a footnote. The grid flagged it. A Miami warehouse in 2016 had fraudulent zoning overlays. The grid flagged it. Those weren't just lucky catches. They were experience disguised as process. When Nathan joined Altus as a product manager in 2019, I welcomed him. He was bright, enthusiastic, and knew how to pitch software ideas. But somewhere along the way, enthusiasm turned into ego. He stopped asking about the grid. He brought in consultants who said we needed to digitize the core. They promised an AI system that could assess risk in minutes. They didn't know that some of our most successful deals took months to decode, and that what saved us wasn't speed but depth. What I built wasn't perfect, but it was battle-tested, lived-in, resilient. I didn't just create a system, I created the shield that protected AltusUrban through every storm it ever faced, and now they wanted to throw that shield away. They never understood what this work meant to me, because for them it was just strategy decks, capital stacks, and quarterly returns. For me, it was something else entirely. It was identity. It was survival. I met my wife Lucia during a zoning meeting in Akron. She was working for the city's Historic Preservation Board, and I was trying to convince them to approve a mixed-use conversion of a decommissioned armory. She grilled me with questions no investor had ever asked. How many affordable units? What will happen to the families on the block during construction? Who's responsible if your investors pull out halfway? I fell in love. Right there, partly because she was tough and partly because she could see through the gloss. We got married 2 years later and built a quiet life on the edge of town. While I handled brownfield investments, Lucia taught Spanish literature at the local college and filled our home with poetry books and warm food. She kept me human when I was drowning in spreadsheets. When I worked late nights running property tax roll-ups and deal valuations, she'd bring me coffee and say, "Victor, don't forget, the world you're rebuilding is full of real people." Then one afternoon, 5 years ago, she collapsed in our kitchen. A silent heart condition, undiagnosed, unpredictable. The ambulance was too late. She was gone before they even reached the ER. After that, I buried myself in work. It wasn't because I didn't feel the pain. I felt it every single morning, but I needed structure systems, momentum, something to keep my hands moving while my heart stood still. AltusUrban gave me that. Every property we reclaimed, every deal we structured, every neighborhood we helped revive it all, gave me a reason to get out of bed. My son Mateo lives in Barcelona now, working in architecture. He calls when he can. I visit once a year. But our worlds grew apart after Lucia died. He never quite forgave me for turning grief into silence. He wanted a father who cried at the dinner table. Instead, he got one who rewrote valuation macros until midnight. I've spent the past 5 years having dinner alone. Most nights it was just frozen meals and old spreadsheets. Sometimes I'd open Lucia's books, try to read a few lines of Neruda or Garcia Marquez, but I always ended up back at my monitor, tweaking formulas no one else ever saw. People think legacy is about buildings or capital. It's not. It's about what you do when no one's watching, about the quiet work, the invisible effort that holds fragile systems together. That was what I gave AltusUrban. Not just models or experience, but years of my life that could have been spent healing, traveling, grieving properly. I gave them my presence when I had nothing else left to give. So when they told me I was being replaced by an app and a marketing campaign, they didn't just fire a systems architect. They erased the last place where my grief had a purpose. The betrayal didn't come with shouting or slamming doors. It came dressed in cashmere, carried by a sleek presentation deck, and delivered with the voice of someone who thought they were giving you a favor. It was a Thursday morning when Nathan called me in for what he called a strategic transition session. I already knew what was coming. The language had changed in recent meetings, less about legacy assets, more about streamlining underwriting workflows and automated asset scoring. He'd stopped looping me in on due diligence calls. The analysts I trained were suddenly taking orders from consultants who hadn't closed a single distressed property deal in their careers. And the decks? Oh, the decks. All charts and buzzwords and AI models that assumed land parcels behaved like consumer products. I stepped into the conference room. A large touchscreen displayed the words, "Project Evolve, Modernizing AltusUrban's Investment Infrastructure." Nathan stood at the front beaming. Behind him was a woman from one of those prop tech consultancies, Trillium Capital Systems, who I'd only seen on LinkedIn. Nathan waved me toward the table like a guest at a product launch, not a partner in a firm I'd helped build from scratch. "Victor, we're entering a new era," he began pacing confidently. "Institutional capital is demanding velocity. They don't want intuition, they want quantification, repeatability, transparency. That's why we're sunsetting the old underwriting platform and moving fully to an AI-first acquisition model." I said nothing. Trillium's consultant took over and walked me through a demo. A flashy dashboard with sliders filters automated yield forecasts. It could underwrite a property in 90 seconds. What it couldn't do, recognize illegal dumping records hidden in scanned PDFs. It couldn't detect when a local council member was quietly blocking permits. It couldn't account for union lawsuits parking easements or tax clawbacks. And it certainly couldn't understand what it meant when a seller said, "We've had this land in the family since '62 and just want it gone." Those were things you felt not calculated. Nathan waited for me to ask questions. I didn't, so he continued. "We know how much you've contributed. We're not erasing that, but we need to evolve, which is why Trillium will take over the migration. We'd love for you to assist for the next few weeks, help transfer knowledge, clean up documentation. HR will reach out." He said it so casually, like I was an IT guy being reassigned, not the man who kept this firm alive through 2 recessions, a fraud scare, and a failed fund merger in 2011. I asked only one question. "Who's handling the environmental deviation model during the transition?" Nathan blinked. "Trillium says their platform accounts for it." I nodded slowly. "What about tax lien volatility buffers or the subsidy clawback index for properties in federally designated zones?" He glanced nervously at the consultant. "We believe the AI will outperform manual models." I stood up. "Well," I said, keeping my voice calm, "be sure the AI knows how to recalculate net present value when a HUD grant is revoked mid-project, or how to spot manipulated soil reports from third-party engineers. Because I spent years coding those exceptions into our risk framework, and none of that is in your decks." He looked stunned. The consultant gave a polite smile, clearly not understanding half the words I'd just said. Nathan then offered what he probably thought was an olive branch. "We'd really value your help in creating a knowledge base for the new system." I gave a polite nod. "Of course, I'll document everything. That's officially part of AltusUrban's current system." They didn't notice the subtlety, or maybe they didn't care. To them, the future was already coded into a slide deck. I was just the past in a worn-out blazer. That was the moment I knew this wasn't just a leadership shift. This was an erasure. I left the room without a single raised voice. No dramatic speeches, no slammed doors, just a silent exit, the kind that unsettles more than fury ever could. I walked back to my office, closed the door, and sat in the same chair I had occupied for over 2 decades. It faced the window overlooking the river where I used to watch construction crews work on our early developments. That view had seen everything from our first $2 million deal to our largest $140 million land bank conversion. And now it would witness my departure. The next 3 days I worked with surgical precision. I compiled 73 pages of technical documentation, database structures, fund hierarchy risk model tables, regulatory compliance timelines, all the official architecture I had ever formalized. I made sure everything was clean, accessible, and fully usable for any competent analyst. But I left out what I had never been asked to write down: the supplemental forecasting formulas I used when tenant covenants clashed with zoning overlays, the quick access macros for uncovering lien layering across state jurisdictions, the undocumented shortcuts to trace political resistance in public comment forums before it turned into a permitting delay. Those weren't part of the official system. They were part of me, the unseen layer that had protected AltusUrban again and again when models failed and real life got messy. I handed everything over to Nathan's assistant by Friday, smiled, shook hands, walked out with a single cardboard box and my father's old calculator, still working after 40 years, unlike most people's memory of what built this place. I left my badge at the security desk, took the elevator down, and stepped into the October wind. It was colder than expected, but familiar just like this moment. I had done this before in another lifetime, leaving another job that no longer understood my value. Only this time, I wasn't afraid. I wasn't 32 and desperate. I was 62 and clear-eyed. By Monday, I was no longer a part of AltusUrban, but I wasn't retired either. That same afternoon, I took a short train ride to the west end of the city. There, in a modest glass office above a co-working space, I met with Sarah Lindstrom, managing partner at Horizon Equity West, a rising investment group specializing in deep turnaround real estate. She had reached out months earlier discreetly asking if I'd consider a quiet advisory role. "We don't need buzzwords," she had said. "We need someone who actually knows how to fix a broken deal." Now I was ready to answer. She offered a 3-month consulting contract on the spot. Full autonomy, no internal politics, no dashboards to pretend with, just real work with real people solving real problems. As I shook her hand, I realized something. Altus hadn't fired me. They had freed me. 3 weeks passed in eerie silence. I had expected a call within days, some minor panic about a missing spreadsheet, a misaligned zoning overlay, or a delayed appraisal. But nothing came. No messages, no emails, no questions. I began to wonder if maybe I had overestimated my role in keeping that machine running. Maybe Trillium's shiny platform really was enough. Maybe they had plugged in their data science models, flipped a few switches, and sailed ahead. Then, on a gray Monday morning, it happened. The first red flag came not from AltusUrban, but from a contact at a community lending bank in Miami. We'd worked together on a controversial agricultural redevelopment project in the outer edges of Dade County, a 92-acre site filled with legal and environmental landmines. It had taken me months to navigate the remediation timelines, runoff analysis, and compliance approvals. But it had closed eventually as part of AltusUrban's most ambitious fund, yet Urban Edge 5, a $200 million venture focused on high-risk, high-reward land repositioning. Now the banker was calling to say the disbursement for that deal had been frozen. "Victor," he said cautiously, "you still involved in this thing?" "Not anymore," I replied, glancing at the clock. "Why, they submitted an updated feasibility package last Friday. AI-generated reports. No signatures, no independent soil verification. The state flagged it immediately. Without the site phase 2 report, the DEP won't clear the funding. We're looking at a standstill." I hung up and felt my stomach tighten. That deal had been the cornerstone of Urban Edge 5. It had been used as a proof of concept in investor decks and Q3 earnings calls. Without it, the entire fund's performance metrics would collapse. I checked the Altus website. The press release from 2 weeks ago was still up. AltusUrban secures landmark agricultural redevelopment in Miami-Dade. AI models confirm accelerated ROI. Accelerated ROI. Based on what, by Wednesday, I started hearing murmurs from former colleagues, analysts, associates, even a compliance manager who'd quietly messaged me. "Do you still have the old tax roll cleanup tool?" Trillium can't figure out why the yield forecast is off by 17%. Then came the second wave. 2 more deals, one in South Chicago, the other in Tacoma, began to unravel. Same pattern. The AI underwriting tools had flagged the properties as Tier A due to surface-level indicators, proximity to transit hubs, regional growth metrics, anchor tenants nearby. But the models missed the buried details I used to catch manually: a pending lawsuit with the city over underground fuel tanks in Chicago and a historic easement in Tacoma that made any structural modification legally impossible without a 24-month review. They had fed the AI clean-looking data, but dirty deals don't show up in spreadsheets. By Friday afternoon, I got a frantic call from Kyle, a junior analyst I had mentored for years. He spoke fast, his voice tense and tired. "Victor, it's happening. The system's breaking down." What system? All of it. The AI can't adapt. Trillium's tool doesn't handle edge cases. We tried to plug in adjustments manually, but the platform crashes. Nathan's losing it. The Miami deal is dead, and the Chicago property flagged by city inspectors this morning. If Tacoma goes under, we breach the loan covenants. I asked the only question that mattered. Do you still have access to the legacy override models? A long silence. They deleted the local directories, said they were redundant, replaced everything with the new cloud suite. I closed my eyes. They hadn't just removed me. They had burned the bridge behind me. That night I checked Horizon's portal. A modest deal was in review, an abandoned light industrial site near Phoenix. Simple on the surface, but I ran a cross-match with old EPA reports and found that 3 adjacent parcels had minor contamination flagged as early as 2009. Nothing appeared in public searches, but the data was in an obscure federal grant registry. I flagged it for Horizon's team and recommended a $1.3 million escrow hold until verification. Sarah emailed back within an hour. This is why we hired you. And then right on cue, Altus called. The number flashed across my screen at 7:42 a.m. Monday morning. It wasn't Nathan. It was Chloe Martin, one of the new VPs of operations. Her voice was tight formal. Victor, we're facing a series of critical integration issues. Trillium's platform doesn't account for the custom filters you used for Fund V's environmental buffers. Do you have copies of those modules I documented all official workflows? I replied evenly. Yes, but these weren't in the documentation. They were emergency builds, temporary at the time. Legacy architecture, not part of any formal transition. She hesitated. Can we engage you to support recovery? I'm available, I said. My consulting rate is $500 per hour. Minimum engagement, 100 hours. Payment in advance. Silence. Then I'll escalate to Nathan. I suggest you do. Over the next 48 hours, the headlines began to appear in industry media. AltusUrban faces questions over AI-led underwriting failure. Investors reevaluate risk in automated real estate funds. I didn't gloat. I didn't post. I just kept working on Horizon's Phoenix file, drinking my coffee and watching the slow implosion of a firm that had traded depth for speed, experience for efficiency, legacy for language. The crash wasn't dramatic. It was precise, because it wasn't caused by a market downturn, a regulatory bombshell, or an activist short seller. It was caused by arrogance, the belief that shortcuts could replace wisdom, and the silence of the one man who knew the difference. It didn't take long for the panic to reach full throttle. By Wednesday morning, my inbox was flooded with urgent subject lines from half a dozen AltusUrban email addresses. The first few came from Chloe Critical Data Gap, immediate support requested. Then Kyle Moore Personal Victor, please help us. It's getting worse. Then a series of increasingly desperate messages from someone at Trillium asking if I could shed light on undocumented overrides and emergency routines not included in the API stack. Each time I read the subject, scrolled and deleted. I wasn't being petty. I was being precise. I had told them exactly what I would and wouldn't document, and I had kept my word. At 10:04 a.m., the call came. It was Nathan. His voice had lost its smooth confidence. It was tight, exhausted. He skipped the pleasantries. Victor, we need to talk. I leaned back in my chair. My second cup of coffee sat beside a zoning packet I was reviewing for Horizon. I didn't pause my work. I'm listening. There are complications. Be specific. The system is rejecting inputs from 6 active projects. Environmental buffers aren't applying. Tax line assumptions are out of sync. Trillium says the legacy modules are missing. Most weren't ever coded into their platform. I waited. We need the models, the overrides, the scripts. You know what I mean? I do? He hesitated, searching for the right words. Would you be willing to walk the team through them? I'm open to consulting, I said flatly. My rate is $500 per hour, minimum 100-hour block. paid up front. That's outrageous. No, Nathan. Outrageous is launching a $200 million fund based on a tech stack you didn't understand. Outrageous is firing the architect and then wondering why the walls are collapsing. I could hear him breathing hard through the line, trying to regulate the anger. You're holding the company hostage. No, I'm offering professional services. At market rate. You made this personal, Nathan. I'm making it professional again. He hung up without another word. 3 hours later, Chloe called again. Her tone was softer this time, less combative, more tired. Victor. The Miami project is officially dead. The city withdrew the permit after the system missed a site-specific restriction tied to a 2006 community vote. Trillium never checked voter archives. That restriction was flagged in my personal review 3 years ago, I said, stored in a local repository outside the central system. It was temporary and undocumented intentionally, so, can you help us restore it? I could rebuild it. Pause. At your consulting rate. Yes? Let me talk to legal. Click. That evening, I received a formal inquiry from AltusUrban's legal team requesting a scope of services NDA and billing framework. I drafted the terms, sent them off, and returned to my work at Horizon. But the damage was already spreading. By Thursday, the firm's largest LP, Sequoia Regional Pension Trust, issued a formal review of AltusUrban's AI-led investment practices. The fund's Q4 capital call had been suspended pending structural underwriting deficiencies. The Tacoma deal had defaulted after a construction partner pulled out due to unforeseen municipal hurdles, and the South Chicago parcel was tied up in environmental remediation no one had disclosed to lenders. Everything they thought would save them speed automation, sleek dashboards had failed under pressure. That night, Nathan called again. This time, he didn't try to hide the urgency. I'm authorizing the contract, he said, his voice hollow. We need you back, immediately. I'll start Monday, I replied. Why not now? Because I have obligations. Horizon expects my full attention until then. You're consulting for Horizon. Yes, silence. You're working with our competition. Correction. I'm working with people who didn't fire me. More silence. Then this will cost us millions. It already has. He sighed, defeated. How long will recovery take if I'm given full access to legacy systems and a clean environment to work in? I can begin a phased restoration. What about the AI platform? You'll need to scale it back. Rebuild trust from the ground up. This isn't a patch job, Nathan. It's a rescue. He didn't respond. Just said, we'll see you Monday, and hung up. I stared at the darkened window of my home office. Across the street porch, lights flickered on in sequence. Ordinary people preparing dinner, turning in for the night. I sipped the last of my coffee and looked over at Lucia's photo beside the printer, her smile calm and unshakable, watching over me like always. She used to say, the truth always catches up, but sometimes it needs a little help. That help was coming, and I was bringing it with interest. By the time I walked back through the doors of AltusUrban on Monday morning, the collapse was already visible in their eyes. The lobby, once buzzing with interns and energy drink-fueled analysts, was quiet. No conversations, no startup energy, no ambient hum of optimism. Just tension, unspoken panic veiled behind polite smiles. Nathan didn't greet me. Chloe did, holding a stack of system access forms and a rushed onboarding folder that looked like it had been printed at midnight. No one mentioned my title. No one called me partner or architect. I was the consultant, and everyone knew what that meant. I walked past desks where I once mentored junior associates, past the glass conference room where they announced my departure, past the mural someone had painted last year that read, "Speed is the new strategy." I paused for a second, looking at it. Someone had tried to peel it off. The edges curled like a failed idea, trying to erase itself. Within 2 hours of logging in, I saw how deep the damage went. The new AI-led system hadn't just failed to predict edge case issues, it had contaminated the entire pipeline. Legacy rules had been disabled in batch without audit trails. Model dependencies were broken. Environmental constraint tables had been overwritten by default values. Worse, the system had automatically reforecast cash flow scenarios using speculative variables, inflating return projections by as much as 24%. And that's what they had reported to LPs. By noon, I confirmed what I already suspected. At least 6 active projects were now materially misrepresented in investor communications. Whether intentional or not, the line between bad tech and potential fraud was now dangerously thin. At 3:17 p.m., the final crack spread. Sequoia Regional Pension Trust, their largest investor, sent a formal letter of concern to the board demanding a third-party audit and temporarily freezing disbursements. A junior associate who still respected me forwarded it to my inbox with a single line, "This is bad, real bad." At 5:02 p.m., Northbridge Municipal Holdings, another $90 million LP, withdrew from Urban Edge 66, a fund that hadn't even launched yet. The next morning, the headline hit the wires, AltusUrban under fire as AI-led fund strategy sparks industry backlash. What happened to due diligence, asks former partner turned whistleblower consultant. I hadn't leaked the story, but someone had. And the market responded swiftly. Phone calls came in from commercial lenders demanding reassurances. Partners put projects on hold. A development firm in Arizona canceled its collaboration, citing risk volatility. Even brokers, those ever-loyal middlemen, began distancing themselves. Internally, the chaos boiled over. Trillium's consultants began disappearing one by one, first from Slack, then from the building. Word spread fast their contract had been terminated. Nathan tried to save face, holding a last-minute all-hands meeting where he blamed legacy blind spots and incomplete transitions. But no one bought it. The junior staff had watched it unfold in real time, how he'd ignored warnings, dismissed documentation, and chased efficiency like a dog chasing traffic. I walked by the break room and heard someone say they thought they could replace wisdom with widgets. By Friday, the board had stepped in. Nathan was no longer CEO. An email circulated Friday morning from the board's legal counsel, effective immediately. Interim operations will be overseen by Chloe Martin and Victor Ramos. A full review of fund architecture disclosures and historical performance data is underway. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just got to work. We began pulling logs, recovering backups, cross-referencing outputs with original assumptions. One by one, I reactivated the legacy filters and safeguards. I rebuilt the models that had taken me decades to shape. Slowly, deals stopped slipping. The bleeding slowed. But the scar would remain on their reputation, on their investor trust, and on the very idea that speed could replace substance. That afternoon, I received a call from an old contact at Blue Cove Partners, a respected fund in New York. "Victor," he said, "we heard what happened. If you ever consider starting something new, something smarter, we'd back it." I didn't answer immediately, because that seed had already been planted. What AltusUrban had destroyed wasn't just a company's credibility. It had reignited something in me. Not revenge. Something far more powerful. Purpose. The board meeting was set for the following Monday. I wasn't formally invited, but that didn't matter. I knew they'd come to me eventually. And they did at exactly 9:32 a.m. Through a direct call from Daniel Klein, chairman of the board and managing partner at a global private equity firm that had seeded AltusUrban over a decade ago. "Victor," he said, voice clipped but not unkind, "we'd like to make a proposal." I didn't respond right away. "We recognize your unique position and, frankly, your value," he continued. "The collapse wasn't just operational, it was philosophical, and we need to rebuild both." Then came the offer: full reinstatement as chief investment architect, total control over underwriting frameworks and deal models, and the authority to restructure Urban Edge 5 and VI from the ground up. No more Trillium, no interference. And Nathan, I asked. Relieved of duty, he replied. Effective immediately. It should have felt like a victory, the kind people dream about when they've been pushed out unfairly and then beg to return. But all I felt was clarity. I appreciate the offer, I said, but I won't come back as a fixer. Silence. Then what would it take, Daniel asked. Respect, I said plainly. And one condition. I'm listening. I won't return to rebuild what failed. I'll return only if we start something new. A dedicated vertical within Altus independent governance, full autonomy. Its mission, long-term urban resilience. Not velocity, not press releases. Real grounded projects with social impact baked in not as a marketing layer, but as a foundation. And I want it named after Lucia. The silence on the other end stretched longer this time. She believed real estate could heal neighborhoods. She was right. That's the only reason I'll reattach my name to this. Daniel cleared his throat. You'd have full latitude, I'd have a blank canvas, I replied. Or I walk. He exhaled slowly. You'll have it. I nodded. Then we begin on Monday. But inside, I knew I had already made a different decision. That same afternoon, I called Sarah Lindstrom at Horizon Equity West and told her everything. I'm stepping away, I said. I'll help close out the Altus chapter. But then I'm building something better. You, and her answer was immediate. I've been waiting for that call, and just like that, a new firm was born, still unnamed, but already alive. We began drafting plans that night. A firm designed around reality, not theory. Around patience, not speed. A space where wisdom wasn't tolerated, it was celebrated. Where legacy wasn't erased, it was refined. Not a return, a redefinition. And this time, I wouldn't be alone. In the world of real estate investing, the tools may evolve, but one truth never changes. Systems don't fail because of data. They fail because of disconnection. What happened at AltusUrban wasn't just a technical oversight. It was a cultural one, a decision to replace decades of lived knowledge with digital convenience. And it came at a cost. As a veteran consultant who has worked across both legacy frameworks and modern PropTech platforms, I can tell you this AI doesn't replace wisdom. It needs it. The strongest models in the world can't read between the lines of a neighborhood's past, or feel the tension in a seller's silence, or anticipate the ripple effects of a delayed permit in a low-trust community. Victor Ramos didn't just walk away from a broken company. He exposed a deeper truth that experience, dignity, and human understanding aren't relics. They're infrastructure. We build with numbers, yes, but we lead with meaning. And in that space between strategy and soul is where the future of real estate truly lives. Legacy isn't just what you leave behind. It's what still works when everything else breaks. If you feel that way, leave a comment. Legacy still matters. And if this story resonates with you, don't forget to share the video so others can be inspired too.